Videos like this are made possible by the generous support of patrons like Simone67. Thanks, Simone.
I knew this would happen to you. Inside I did, but I refused to know the truth. I'm heading back inside, sit at home with you. I think I know what's wrong. My friends put on their bravest face, their tails between their legs, something's out of place. I bet their mothers let them know what I'm about to face. Keep your mouth zipped, son. Baby, I've been there before. I was at the point where all I really wanted was someone. Now I'm still hanging on. I was at the end of every tether, waiting for what once was. Tell me all the important stuff. What's your favorite color? What makes you so tough? Please don't let go when you've had enough. I'm on my knees. Baby, I've been there before. I was at the point where all I really wanted was someone, and now I'm still hanging on. I was at the end of every tether, waiting for what once was.
Hello Penguinauts, I am the Beardy Penguin and welcome back to For All Kerbalkind. It's been quite a while, but that's what happens when you have university, you finish Beyond Kerbal, you have to arrange and perform a song, which I do hope you enjoyed, and you expand your space centers using Kerbal constructs, as you can see Baikonur in all of its glory now, with individual launch pads for each of our different classes of launch pad instead of having a single shape-shifting one. You can see our unlimited tonnage launch pad, which is being constructed off to the left for our N1 boosters, although we don't quite have the technology to build those just yet. We do also have a lot of trains, some of which actually move, which absolutely blew my mind on stream. But regardless, we have just finished our Sever moon mission, which is the first ever crewed lunar orbit. So using the funds from that, as well as the funds we're given by accepting the first moon landing contract, we have about 10 million funds to invest in our space program. So we're going to upgrade the astronaut complex so we can plant flags, as well as our R&D center and our runway. We're then going to head into the R&D center, where we finished researching lunar exploration era materials science, which gives us the fuel tanks we need to build the N1 rocket. Yes, this episode we're going to be researching all the technology we need to begin working on our first boosters in 1964. We've also finished researching advanced jet engines, which gives us turbojet engines that we need to build our rocket interceptor, which we designed ages ago. It does also give us access to Concorde parts, and of course we won't be building a Concorde, but I'm very tempted to build the Tupolev 144 at some point, also affectionately known as the Concorde ski. Now we're then investing the rest of our money. We're leaving about 1 million funds left for some tooling, because I was working on a few future missions in this episode, which won't be shown until next episode, but we're investing about 4 million funds into our build speed and into our R&D, because I want to get that line 1 VAB up as much as possible. As soon as we have the tech to build the N1, we want to get them built. At the moment, I think even with 7.5 build points a second, it's still going to take about half a year to build an N1, and we want to eventually get that down to about 3 months. I think that's a pretty good launch cadence. In the meantime, though, we are launching our final R13. I was tempted to just scrap this thing, but we had an R13 rocket just lying around, and I thought, you know, we might as well just finish it and launch it. These things don't cost that much, but yeah, they're not particularly reliable. We've had a lot of launch failures with these things. In fact, the last successful lunar lander was a Lunar 10, and this is Lunar 13. Of course, in reality, the Soviets, whenever a mission failed, didn't actually give it the next number in the series. They gave it the Cosmos designation, and they classified the mission to give the illusion that they never had any failures. A lot of people have pointed that out to me and said that maybe I should do the same thing, but I decided not to do that early on in the series, just to make things a bit easier to follow. If I have like 5 launch failures of Lunar 12, and people are talking about Lunar 12, they're going to be like, which one? You know, I think it's easier to keep track of the series if each mission has its own numbering system. Let's just say that the Soviet Union isn't quite as vain in this timeline. They admit that rocket science is hard, and some of them have failures. Speaking of failures, though, this mission actually goes to plan, which was a surprise. I wasn't actually paying much attention. And that's a bit of an issue, because I was expecting one of the many, many stages that it takes to get this thing into orbit were going to fail. So I wasn't really paying very close attention to the mission. I was just waiting for the explosion to happen, and then it just kind of didn't. And the R13 has extremely fine delta V margins. You have to be paying really close attention in order to be able to actually land on the moon. You have about 50 meters per second of wiggle room. And yeah, I haven't flown the R13 in quite a while, so our ascent profile wasn't as efficient as it could have been. So unfortunately, we are about 50 to 100 meters per second short. I mean, we smash into the moon here at 200 meters per second, but 250, I believe, but our airbags can survive landings below 200 meters per second. So another 50 and we would have been fine. But still, we will announce the success of our latest lunar impactor mission as we never build another R13 ever again. I hate that rocket. It was a jank rocket designed just to get something to the lunar surface, and we didn't even manage to beat the Americans in that respect. I'm still salty about the fact they beat us by like 3 hours. That's just ridiculous. Anyway, on the theme of last launches of a rocket family, this is the final launch of the R12 Cosmos launch vehicle. Now, it has been a workhorse for our space program, But the failure rate of these things is just unacceptable. Even with all the engine data we have, these things have a, I believe, 12 to 15% failure. And we've really been feeling that over the last few episodes. I'm kind of sick of these things. And we need a much more reliable and a more powerful and more affordable launch vehicle for our commercial satellite missions. Now, this actually ends on a high note. Unlike the last mission, we insert into our medium Earth orbit successfully and hand off our satellite to the customer, getting paid about 100,000 funds for our trouble. But yeah, we're not going to be launching the R12 anymore. We have a replacement in the pipeline. In the meantime, though, we are accepting the first space station contract because I'm finally confident we're going to be able to complete it before its deadline. And that gives us another 3 million funds to play with, and of course we're investing that into our R&D and our build lines. We want to have the Line 1 VAB be for N1 rockets, the Line 2 be able to build UR500 boosters relatively quickly, and then the final Line 3 be for our R11 Fickle launch vehicles like the one you see here. Yes, now this is the next generation of lunar lander launchers. It used to be that the R11 just couldn't put enough tonnage into orbit to get something to the lunar surface. But that has changed with the unlocking of the RD58. Now, the RD58 upgrade for the S1 5400 staged combustion engine is incredible. It gives it 10 minutes of burn time. This is actually going to be almost like our RL10. Of course, it runs on Keralox, but it's such an efficient upper stage engine with so many relights and such a long burn time. It really is going to be the workhorse of lunar exploration. It's even going to power our crewed lunar mission in future with the Block Day upper stage, which I have designed for another mission, but we're not going to see that yet in this episode. I haven't really bothered with designing iconic upper stages yet. I've just been bothering about the iconic launch vehicles, but the Block Day is very, very iconic, particularly for any Soviet rocketry nerds. So yeah, I thought I might as well spend a little bit of extra money tooling the iconic looking stage, powered by the same engine which is powering this one. But this is actually a balloon tank upper stage, just so we could get as much performance out of it as possible. It's quite an expensive upper stage, but it fits onto the R11. We couldn't really do this with integral tanks. But yeah, the Block Day, which is going to be launched on the UR500 and of course the N1, is a bit heavier but a lot cheaper, at least after tooling it. It took about 200,000 funds to tool the damn thing. Anyway, as you can see, we have to use about half of our fuel just to finish getting into orbit, but then we still have mountains of delta V left, almost 6,000 meters per second left once we're in orbit. So yeah, this engine, as I said, is truly incredible, and it's not even at its final iteration, but the difference between the upgraded S1 engines we used on the Yaka module of the Sever lunar mission and this is just incredible. I was able to pull off the Yaka mission with S1 engines, but I think we probably could have done it without that extra fuel module if we'd used RD58s. But yeah, it would have taken another couple of months in order to upgrade to RD58s on that mission, and also they wouldn't have been as reliable since they would be new engines effectively, and I didn't want to take that risk with a crewed mission. So we managed to pull off that mission anyway, but it would have had far less stringent delta V margins if we had used the RD58. Though it wasn't a moment too soon, you know, because well, we managed to get there first. We didn't get to a lunar flyby first, unfortunately. Gemini 3 beat us to that by a really, really big margin. Kind of embarrassing. N9 had a huge injection of funds into his program, particularly with accepting the first moon landing contract a lot earlier than us, so his research speed has been a lot higher than ours for about a year and a half. So he's probably caught up to us tech-wise right now. Things are more neck and neck than I would like, so we really can't rest on our laurels. But with the advent of the RD58, we now have a reliable way of transporting a lander to the surface of the moon. And that's really the theme you're going to see with all of the new launch vehicles you see in this episode. Reliability is the order of the day. We've just had far too many launch failures over the last couple of years. Some really unreliable jank rockets we've been using just to get to milestones as soon as possible. But now we've got to those milestones, we really just need reliable ways of completing these missions and cost-effective ways of completing them as well. As you can see though, Luna 14 is approaching the lunar surface, and with our final relight of the RD-58, we slow its velocity, extend our airbags, and we bounce to the lunar surface. Yes, we still don't quite have the engines we need to do a powered descent to the lunar surface, so it's still much more effective just to use airbags. Unfortunately, though, we do land the wrong way up. Now, we have extra landing legs, which we can use to roll ourselves over, but this thing seems to have an infinite moment of inertia, so it just keeps rolling for about 10 minutes, which not only is a bit irritating, but also ends up breaking the solar panel on top. Yeah, it gives it a bit of a beating. Perhaps it gets scratched or damaged by lunar dust, but whatever the cause, the solar panel doesn't work anymore. It's taken a bit too much damage upon landing. So this was supposed to last for about 2 weeks, analyzing soil samples, as well as taking magnetometer readings and a whole host of new science experiments. We haven't even landed on the moon before, but unfortunately it's only going to last about 11 hours because the solar panel is broken. So, bit of a shame, but that's just the risk you take when you land your lunar probes in the manner that we've been landing them. But the R11, even with the RD-58 powered up a stage, doesn't have enough delta V to send a powered lander to the lunar surface. Still though, Luna 14 is the little probe that could. We're able to complete and transmit our shorter scientific experiments, but unfortunately, if we want to complete those longer ones, we're really going to need to do a powered descent to the lunar surface. So it's convenient then that we've just unlocked the lunar landing node, which not only gives us access to the LK lander and its associated engines, but also the KTDU-417, which powered the Luna 15 to 24 probes, and that is going to power a sample return mission in the next episode. In the meantime, though, we've accepted the Farside lunar landing and lunar rover contracts, as we know we're going to be able to do those now, and we're going to launch another Soyuz mission. Now, this is a relatively routine low Earth orbit flight. We're just flying up, orbiting for a few days, and then coming back. But we have Yuri, Alexei, and Konstantin on board, who are our only cosmonauts who haven't flown Soyuz yet. And well, they're going to need to get to grips with the controls because we're going to be flying Soyuz to the moon soon enough. Mid next year, we'll be unlocking the lunar-rated Soyuz. And I guess we've flown a Soyuz derivative to the moon already. We've flown Zond there, but the LOK Soyuz is a fully lunar-rated Soyuz spacecraft, which will be forming a part of not only another lunar orbit mission, but also our lunar landing mission. Once we, of course, have done a few test flights of the N1. Myself and N9 have agreed on a certain number of test flights and prerequisite missions before we go for a lunar landing. I mean, we could just launch it on our first N1 like we did in Mars Horizon and just gamble the crew's lives on a 50-50 coin flip. But yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to risk that. And we also don't want to really leave the first moon landing up to RNG, which is why N9 and I agreed that we were going to do a certain number of prerequisite test missions before we even attempt a lunar landing. Strangely enough, these 3-crew low Earth orbit contracts are actually easier than the 2-crew ones. The 2-crew ones always required maneuvers and going to different orbits that usually cross the Van Allen belts and expose the crew to high levels of radiation. The 3-crew ones pay better and also just require you to put them into a roughly equatorial orbit and then leave them there for 12 days. So yeah, we're kind of quids in here. This was a perfectly routine mission, although we're not actually getting any science out of it. The low Earth orbit rated Soyuz doesn't have the tier 3 science experiments. It has the same level of experiments as the Voskhod capsules, so we can use these to get a lot of money and do regular low Earth orbit missions, but they're not really earning us much in the way of science. Regardless, though, you can see there that we have a much nicer re-entry than Soyuz 1 and Soyuz 2 did, thanks to Rocketcello for recommending the internal RCS mod on my Sever mission stream. As you can see, it makes the Soyuz capsule actually look like it did in reality, and we make a nice gentle landing near Tashkent in the Uzbek SSR. which is actually the 4th largest city in the USSR in this time period. You can see there Yuri brandishing his brand new TP-82 Cosmonaut survival pistol. Thanks to Naughty Word and Katniss for modeling and getting that working, since it's actually the pistol that was carried on Soyuz in case it landed in the Siberian wilderness. So there you can see we're investing a bunch more money into the Space Center. That's a bit of a theme of this episode. And heading back over to Plesetsk, which we haven't actually seen this episode in its full remodeled glory yet. We are launching the KE-50 Grom, which translates to thunder in Russian. And this is a high altitude rocket interceptor. We designed it in a stream a while back, but we didn't have the turbojet engines we needed to power it until now. But Andrei Kerman, our experimental test pilot, is going to take it up for its maiden flight. Now, the reason why we're actually building and launching this aircraft is because the high flying science starts at 40 kilometers. So if we can develop an aircraft which can get up above 40 kilometers reliably and without the expense and time of air launching, then we can hopefully get ourselves a bit of science. Now the KE-50, it's based off of the YE-50, which was a variant of the MiG-21 in reality, and it's powered by the S-155 rocket engine as well as a 9K-50 turbojet. Now the 9K-50 is actually a French turbojet. It wasn't powered by that in reality, but we don't really have access to any Russian turbojet engines, so this was the closest thing I could get to it. Now all we do is we rapidly ascend to 10 kilometers, then we fly through the sound barrier, and then once we're through the sound barrier we don't really need the jet engine anymore. Now I probably should have saved some kerosene for the return flight to Plesetsk, but I wanted to push this aircraft to its absolute limit. Unfortunately though, as you can probably tell, we left the flaps down up until we got to about 25 kilometers in altitude, which was really impeding this aircraft performance. I was wondering why it was flying so badly and failing to get to the altitude it could in simulations. Yeah, Andre left the flaps down. So unfortunately, we're going to peak at 36 kilometers in this first flight, but it doesn't really matter. We don't need to push the aircraft to its absolute limits on this first flight here. You can also see the internal RCS mod once again showing its wonderful features. As you can see there, we don't have to have any massive bulky RCS modules on the aircraft. We can actually have them be part of the fuselage, which I think looks a lot better and allows us to maintain control of the aircraft up above the 40 kilometer mark. Regardless though, the first flight has been a little bit of a failure, but well, you know, Andre hasn't blown himself up, so you know, I'd still call that a success. Though he still has to actually land it, which, since we're a few hundred kilometers away from Plesetsk at this point, is easier said than done. I think in future variants of this aircraft, I'm going to give it delta wings like the MiG-21 actually had, which I think will make it fly a lot better at the higher altitudes, but I wanted this to look as close to the YE-50 as possible because it's quite an iconic aircraft, and after all, we're using the rocket engine that it actually used in reality. Still though, we managed to land, I was going to say gracefully, but after a few bounces we managed to touch down on a grassy plain about 100 kilometers or so from Plesetsk, so the recovery crews can get out to us. Yeah, this was extremely nerve-wracking. This thing has to land at about 150 meters per second because of those little spindly wings and just how heavy the aircraft actually is. We couldn't launch it with just a rocket engine. It needed that turbojet engine, so we needed advanced jet engines to be able to pull this off. Still though, we're going to give it another attempt. Andre is determined to get up above that 40 kilometer mark and set an altitude record. Probably not for rocket planes, but just for ground-launched interceptors. I know N9 has launched his rocket aircraft from the runway before and headed up above the Kármán line. Or maybe it's called the Kerman line in this in this timeline. Who knows? Enjoy Plesetsk in all of its newly expanded glory. I've given Plesetsk more of an aircraft focus since this is the home of our experimental aircraft programs. And I've also doubled the length of the runway because we needed it to launch this thing. As I said, it can't actually generate lift until it's up above about 150 meters per second. So they were following the same profile as before, but things are definitely a lot easier with the flaps up, as they should be. And we managed to rocket through the sound barrier. Then we pull up into a sharp vertical climb. Well, not quite vertical. We get up to about 40 degrees. Yeah, I intended this thing to be like an answer to the English Electric Lightning, but it's nowhere near as capable as that aircraft. You will be seeing that aircraft soon though, although not on my channel, because Carnasa is actually joining the series as the UK Space Agency and then later the European Space Agency. Yes, you all asked for it and it's finally happening. And there is a trailer on his channel that was released last Sunday, so I hope you're looking forward to that. But he's going to be starting with about 1 year per episode, and we're currently about 6 months per episode. So he's starting in 1964. You'll probably see his first episode in about a month's time. I imagine he'll probably get to orbit within about a year. He's starting with all the tier 1 tech, so all the tech you can research with the tier 1 R&D center, so that should give him a nice little push forward. He can also do rideshare missions, so we might start the Intercosmos program as soon as we've landed on the moon and begin not only flying European astronauts but also cosmonauts from Soviet allied countries, which is actually something I've been planning for a little while. So I want to fly Kerbals named by patrons. So anyone who's at the, I believe it's King Penguin tier, gets to name a Kerbal who can fly in the Intercosmos program and decide which Soviet allied country they come from. I think that's going to be a bit of fun, but that's going to be for post-moon landing stuff. We're not going to land on the moon for another episode or two yet. We're sort of, at the rate we're going, kind of aiming for 1965. Regardless, though, Andre is able to successfully take the aircraft above 40 kilometers in his second flight, and we get a whole 0.2 science. So yeah, we're not going to do that again until we've upgraded the aircraft so we can actually maintain that altitude for a little bit longer. We're going to get a lot more science from this mission, Krasnyy 2. I don't know if you guys remember this mission. It's been 8 months since the last episode of All Kerbalkind, but this is finally arriving at Mars, and we're entering into an orbit. Yes, this is the first ever orbit of Mars. We're actually thrashing the Americans when it comes to interplanetary spacecraft right now. Not only have we got the first Venus orbiter, but we're now getting the first Mars orbiter, and we get beautiful views of the red planet. Orbiting Mars isn't the only goal of this mission though. As you can see, we're planning to perform flybys of both of its moons, Deimos and Phobos. So we're entering into a highly eccentric orbit, although thankfully it's still a low enough orbit to complete the Mars orbit contract, and then we're planning flybys of Phobos and Deimos. Now we don't have anywhere near enough delta V to enter into orbits of those moons or to land on either of them, but we do have enough delta V to perform repeated flybys. So we're going to do one flyby of each first, just to complete their associated contract, and then once we've transmitted all the science from orbiting Mars, then we might do some more flybys in future. At this distance from the sun, it's taking a very long time for Krasnyy 2 to actually recharge its solar panels, so we don't have enough electric charge to actually transmit all the data that we're getting. So we're going to wait for its solar panels to actually fully recharge its batteries before we even attempt to start transmitting some of this scientific data We do manage to get some beautiful shots of flying by both of the moons though, and we are going to transmit data from those just so we can complete those contracts and get lots and lots of money, which we can invest into our space center. We're putting a lot of funding into the space center this episode. It really is the final straight before the first crewed lunar landings. So yeah, every last fund counts. Still though, we had to enter into a bit of a strange orbit there to get our Phobos encounter using the least delta V possible, so we're just going to get ourselves back into Mars orbit, make sure we don't smash into the atmosphere. That would be a little bit embarrassing. Unfortunately, we don't have enough delta V to enter into a high enough inclination orbit to complete our orbital perturbation experiment, which means we're missing out on about 600 science or so, but we don't have enough electric charge to even transmit the science experiments that we can complete, so I'm not too worried about that. We should have a slow trickle of science coming in over the next few months though, and once it's finished getting all the data it can, which should probably take about a year or two, then we might do a couple more flybys of each of its moons. But we should get a steady trickle over the next few months like we've been getting from Venera 3. Still though, that gives us a lot of money to play with, and now we're investing a lot more. We were leaving about 1 million funds free because we had a lot of tooling and a lot of missions to plan, but now we've unlocked a lot of the parts for the N1. We know we're not going to need much more than about 500,000 funds in the bank at any one time, so we're starting to run our space program a little closer to the line to make sure we're investing as much of that money as we can, that none of it's being wasted just sitting around, because of course we're in the Soviet Union. We don't sit on capital in this nation. While we wait for our far side lunar landing and sample return missions to be constructed though, we're launching a bit of an infrastructure mission. This is Luna 15, or more specifically Luna 15 A, B, and C. We are finally constructing a lunar communications network because we want to be able to communicate with our probes when they land on the far side of the moon, obviously. As well as our sample return mission when it enters into orbit, because most of our orbital insertion burns are on the far side of the moon, and we keep losing contact with our probes and doing non-ideal, relatively inefficient burns. As you can see here, we have to wait until we're actually within line of sight of the Earth before we can enter into orbit. So we're launching 3 probes and they're into a 24-hour orbit of the moon. That also means we'll be able to communicate with our crew when they go to the moon. We won't actually have any blackout when they go around the far side like the Apollo missions did, so we'll have full communication with them at all times, which I think makes things a little bit safer for them. You can see here we just entered into a 16-hour orbit, and now we're launching each probe one at a time up into their final 24-hour orbits, and then we're just adjusting those orbits with the little RCS port on the front to make sure they're exactly 24 hours, so these probes hopefully shouldn't drift. They should maintain a pretty accurate separation between them, so we can have communication at all points along at least the lunar equator. We might need to put, if not a communications network, another probe or two into a polar orbit of the moon to make sure we have full communications coverage. Also, these probes aren't in a high enough inclination orbit to actually do the orbital perturbation experiment, which I did have on board, but kind of forgot about until I'd already put all of them into their final orbits. But yeah, I'm thinking, particularly with the rocket we're about to be launching at the end of the episode, we might be able to launch probes, orbiters in fact, to the moon from Persetsk. So that's something we might investigate in the next episode. But regardless, we have our communications network, and we finally unlock the 1969 staged combustion engines node, which means we have all the engines we need to begin building our first N1 booster. Of course, we still have to wait a little while before we can build the capsules we need to actually do a lunar mission, but we can get working on the first rocket, which is really, really exciting. This, however, is the new rocket I have been hinting at throughout the episode. This is the UR-100, which is slated to replace the R-12. Not only is it much more powerful, it can lift 1.5 tons into orbit, it's much cheaper and much, much more reliable. It's also only 60 tons, which means it's cheaper and faster to roll out. We can launch it from this 60-ton launch pad rather than the 151 required for the R-12. Now, this thing launches into orbit like a bat out of hell. It's powered by an RD-253 engine, which is the same engine we used 6 of in the first stage of the Proton. The second stage is then powered by an RD-0210 engine, which also powers the second stage of the Proton, though we need 4 of them in that. Look at this. Look at this thing fly. Just zooms up into orbit. And yeah, the reliability of these engines is an order of magnitude better than the engines we used on the R12. So it's cheaper and it's better in every way. In fact, it's so powerful. If we slap the 3rd stage onto this thing, powered by an RD-58, I'm confident we can not only send large 1.5-ton spacecraft into Molniya, Tundra, and even geostationary orbit, but I think we can send a small orbiter to the moon, and that will be a really, really cost-effective way to get a lot of science, which we still haven't actually got. You can see here, we finished burning the 2nd stage, and then the much larger Svet satellite bus, Svet 21 here, is launched into orbit. The actual Svet satellite itself now is much, much larger and much more capable. It stores a lot more electric charge, has much larger solar panels, so this should be able to last for a few years. Of course, this one itself won't actually last that long because we're handing it off to a customer, but I'm looking forward to actually launching a few new communication satellites. A lot of our Molniya, Tundra, and other Svet satellites have long since run out of electric charge. Their solar panels have degraded and they're no longer working. So we're going to need some new communication satellites soon. So thankfully we have a very cheap and reliable way of launching those from now on. This is a bit dissimilar to the real UR100, but we don't actually have the engines for that, so I think that was a pretty good approximation. But that is the end of the episode. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I do hope you have enjoyed. I'm sorry it's been so long, but we're finally back to a 2-week upload schedule. Yes, you heard me right. For All Kerbalkind is going to be coming out every other Sunday once again, and we're going to try and do that come hell or high water. I think it'll probably have to take a hiatus during exam seasons again, but if we have to reduce the number of months per episode, reduce to maybe 20-minute episodes, then that's what we're going to do. So we're back to a regular upload schedule. We're back, baby. And of course, Carnasa is joining very, very soon, so you'll have his episodes to look forward to as well as ours. Thanks for watching, Penguinauts. I do hope you've enjoyed, and be sure to head over to N9's channel now for the premiere of his episode if you want to see what those pesky Amerikanskis have been up to in the latter half of 1963. A massive thank you to my patrons and donators for their generous support, and an extra special thank you to the Amazing Steak, Olaf Hammerhand, Dakota Clark, Lady Lagsalot, Lightning Gamer, Madzor, Peterless Chinets, Dennis Klomp, Simone67, Scott Milligan, Elmac, and NX74656.